Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to my library tour for 2022, where I'm giving myself a visual record of all the books in my possession, with occasional detours into books that aren't in my possession, to the Library of the Lost, where I show you books that I've once owned and scanned their covers, but for some reason or other don't have them anymore. I lapsed on the Library Tour of the Lost for a little while and heard from it. So I heard about that lapse from quite a few people who wanted it to continue. So I'm continuing it now. We're going to talk about a few of the books that are in the Library of the Lost. I still have not come to grips with the little book room. So the Library of the Lost is going to have to do until that happens. The first one I got it as a Penguin trade paperback. It's a novel called Bloodacre by Peter Landesman. Who also did a second novel. I don't know if it's referenced on this cover, but he was a new author. He was unknown to me when I was selling these things 30 years ago or whatever. And I want to say the other one was called The Raven. But one way or another, they were both really good. They were both the Bloodacre is semi-noirish. It's fathers and sons. There's a bit of action in the third act that's not very convincing. And I read these books, his two books, and thought I would gladly follow this author. I might not agree with some of his narrative choices, but he's interesting. I would follow him, and then he disappeared. He disappeared completely. And I think I remember learning at one point that he disappeared into Hollywood, straight out of Holden Caulfield. That he's hung up a very promising literary career in order to go to Hollywood and write screenplays that never get done in order to have a mansion. I have no idea if that's true, but I don't think he's written more than the two books that I know him for. And that's a shame, because they were accomplished. So that's the first one. If I saw it again in a Penguin mass market or a Penguin trade paper, I'd probably grab it. Then this next one needs no introduction. This is the great classicist Mary Beard. This is her book, Confronting the Classics. I was intrigued by the cover, and it's all about how basically it's a manual on how you teach the Greek and Roman classics in what the news periodicals once 20 years ago referred to as a post-literate age. How do you do that? How do you teach this stuff in that age? I would read anything that Mary Beard had to write about anything of a classical nature, so I was glad to read it. This next one is also classical. This is a subgenre of fiction to which I have contributed myself. This is by Sarah Franklin, and this is called Daughter of Troy. And this is a terrific Trojan War novel. It's nothing like my own Trojan War novel, Troy War, but then no Trojan War novel that I've ever read is. Troy War is a Nile cataract of gore and depravity. Troy War has, as one old friend of mine said, scarcely a page that is free of violence, rape, or both. Troy War came out of nowhere. I have no idea how I wrote it, why it was my fictional response to the classics I love so much. But this is not like that. It has lots of humor, which you wouldn't expect in a Trojan War novel, and lots of feeling as well. It's told from the point of view of Briseis, and it works much better than, for instance, Pat Barker's book does. I don't know if it's still in print, but it's a terrific Trojan War novel to hunt down and find if you like that kind of thing. One of the best ones that I've ever read. Okay, all right, this next one is by Robert O'Kell, a heck of a guy, very nice guy, who decided to take one for the team. He wanted to write a book about Benjamin Disraeli, and the British Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli, who shaped an empire for Queen Victoria, who was a scandalous figure, a reliable source of quips for the newspapers, and who was, you were reminded in every single news story about him anywhere in the entire course of his life, a Jew. But he was also one other thing. He was one other thing that historians tend to forget. He was also a novelist. And Robert O'Kell decided to take one for the team by not only reading Disraeli's novels, but studying them. And he turned out a book that it's not any great praise to say that the book that resulted from him reading all those things is much better than anything Disraeli wrote. That's not hard. But it's also a terrific book. I think you would probably have to be interested in Disraeli to be interested in this book. This is Disraeli, The Romance of Politics. We're a little bit washed out here because of the daylight, but I think you can sort of make it out. This is one of those books in the Library of the Lost that I really wish I'd held on to. I imagine would very much repay a reread. And for some reason I did not hold on to it. I know that I don't have this anymore. And I don't think in America it ever got a paperback edition. I loved it. I thought it was, believe it or not, it was fascinating, but it was also, believe it or not, playful. While reading Disraeli's novels, the only problem with the book, and it's not much of a problem because it was totally charming, but the only problem with the book is the one you would expect, which is Stockholm Syndrome set in. And by the end of the book, Robert O'Kell is probably willing to say that the books are good. They aren't. They aren't. None of them are. But they are interesting. They are almost unprecedented in coming from a British politician that high up on the food chain. Then we have a bit of fantasy. I think I had a trade paperback of this. I really don't remember it. This is Bloodstone, a book in the Rebel Angels series by Gillian Phillip. I honestly don't remember anything about this. If I saw it at a used bookstore, I can guess why I bought it. And any of you who have ever walked down a city street with me and seen where some of my attention goes in an undergraduate direction and then watched how that undergraduate directed attention completely evaporates if a dog is on the scene, then you will know why I was interested in this cover. And it wasn't the set of cheekbones that you think. It was the other set of cheekbones. That's probably why I got it, because that probably happened, but I don't remember anything about it. I'm sure that I read it. Okay, this next one is by Denise Kiernan. This was really good. This is another one I wish I'd held on to. This is The Girls of Atomic City. The untold story of the women behind the development of the atomic bomb in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, who could not. It was a whole city that was made in order to facilitate the streamlining of one key piece of technology in the final construction of the atomic bomb. And the girls here is because that's what they were referred to by their colleagues. But these young women left their families behind. They took a lot of chances, not just with security and with, the talk of the town, but also with some of the machinery. It's a fascinating story. Denise Kiernan does a great job at fleshing out who these women were and what part they played. And, you keep expecting, a part of you probably reads a book like this and hopes that maybe this was a chance where the horrible offhand, just unthinking misogyny of the mid-century maybe let up. Maybe it let up a little because these women had such a starring role. But no. At the end of the book, you got to prepare yourself. It's the same. There were hardly any happy endings for the women who were involved in either the formative days of the development of the atom bomb or, equally importantly, the formative days of the American space race. There are hardly any completely happy endings, the endings that are deserved. But it's still a humdinger of a story. Just fantastically done. Okay, this next one is a tome. It's a gigantic tome. It would be in a criticism section. Right now I have a criticism section only for books about books. Not anything else. I don't have a theater criticism section or opera criticism or music criticism or anything like that. If I did, well, there are 10,000 books like that on movie criticism. I'd have a lot of those. And I'd have this too. This is Frank Rich's big book. This is like 1,000 pages long. Hot Seat. And this is a collection of a decade of his reviews when he was known as the Butcher of Broadway. When a scathing review from him could close your show. And when praise from him would pack your seats. You'd have lines for weeks. If he said this is a great show, or especially if he said this is an unknown great show, this is a diamond in the rough. He could make or break a career. And if you're thinking, well, when I think about that, I think that's probably bad for a writer. You're entirely right. Oh my God, you're entirely right. If you read this thing, I read this thing in a way that I don't think many people do or ever did, in a way that I don't think it was even designed to do. I read it from front to back. And so I read it chronologically. And oh my, you can see it change. You can see it change, and it's not a good change. I would still probably grab this thing if I saw it, but that once a critic gets that powerful, that's bad news. Very bad news. Then this next one, it was a big, oversized, heavily illustrated thing. I got rid of it because I usually don't keep such things, even if they're spot on target. And this is by Andrew Sanders, and it's called In the Olden Time, Victorians and the British Past. And don't let the title deceive you. This extends a good deal into the Edwardian era as well. And it's all about the Victorians famously mythologizing and sanitizing and romanticizing the past of their own culture, their own society, their own literature. Literature especially, as some of you will know on the cover there, that is not Wilson. That is not young Wilson. That's a extremely romanticized portrait of Thomas Chatterton. And you can't make out the whole thing. This is just a detail from the painting. The painting is well worth studying. It's amazing. But there's Chatterton dying of poison in his garret with all of his unpublished writings there and all that. And that is just the sort of story the Victorians loved. And they loved to laud it and lionize it. You see it everywhere. And this book does a really good job of that. You look at the Victorian historical paintings by people like Sir Lawrence Alma-Tadema were the most popular things in the world. And that's all they do, is romanticize the past. Look at, for instance, Alfred Lord Tennyson. This was a wonderful book on that. I don't know why I would get rid of it. It is squarely in my wheelhouse, but I did. This next one was a book called Myself with Others. This is occasional work by Carlos Fuentes. You're not going to be able to make this out because of the light. But this is exactly the sort of thing that I have a whole bookcase of. This is. Can I make that any better? I wonder if I can. Did that do anything to help make this any better? Oh, only marginally. Well, it's a little bit. It's better than nothing. This is a collection of occasional pieces of book writing and prefaces and addresses and whatnot, just exactly like I have a whole bookcase of. I don't have this anymore, but in my own defense, I didn't have that bookcase when I had this, or I would probably have kept it. Okay, this next one is by R. Haven Wiley. This is Noise Matters. And this is a scientific study of the development of communication. Which is separate from noise. It is the refinement of noise into meaning. And when you think about it, every animal species in the world has developed this. It's by any account the most ubiquitous case of convergent evolution there is. Almost every species on Earth realizes that communication is necessary. Some kind of communication is necessary. So this book could have been 10 times longer. I remember it being a bit dry at times. I'm always one of the harshest readers of this kind of book because I love popular science and I love the natural world. And if the writer doesn't convey the fascination here, they lose me as a reader a little bit. I think that's not the only time where this happened. Okay, this next one's really big. I wish I had it. I don't know why I got rid of it. It's by Kevin Sharp, and it's Rebranding Rule. And it's about the restoration of King Charles II. And how that would work, right? You've been in exile. You've been a fugitive. You've been hunted. And the restoration of the monarchy, which at times for years you thought would never happen, has happened. And suddenly you aren't a vagabond anymore. Suddenly you aren't a debtor to anybody who's willing to lend you £10. Instead, you're king of England. Again, there's a king in England again, and you are the king. What do you do if that's the case? And you're taking over the throne that has just been given back from revolution, from Cromwell and his son. What do you do to remake the monarchy? Not just the machinery of it, but the perception of it. Hence the title. I loved this book. This author wrote, I think, 4 big books, and I used to have them all. I have only one. Now I don't have any. I have only the Noble Cause. I don't have anything else. But I loved it. If I came across it again, I would grab it. I would gobble it up. Okay, then this next one is by Miyuko Chu, and it is not Noise Matters. It is not about song or speech or anything, but it comes close. This is Songbird Journeys, where the author follows migratory songbirds. Excuse me. So it's also about migratory routes and how birds evolve to do that and how they adapt once they get to where they're going with their vacation home or once they get back home. A great bird book that I wish I still had. Then this next one is Ballantine. We saw an example of this in my actual From the Shelf library tour. Ballantine had the rights to Tarzan and John Carter of Mars, and they commissioned a whole run of covers for their Tarzan adventures, and then they did it again. Then they revamped their covers with Frank Frazetta and Boris Vallejo and whatnot. And the earlier run of covers, they were all done on white mass-market paperbacks, and not a lot of them appeal to me. Otherwise, I've seen them plenty of times at the Brattle Bookshop. I probably have them all. I have all of the black spine Ballantines that came after them. But these white spine ones, this is Tarzan of the Apes. And you can see some of these covers really do work. There is Tarzan giving his call. He is riding Trantor the elephant, and he has a little monkey there. In this case, the monkey is not a chimpanzee; it's a macaque. And there are some scarlet macaws just to add to the variety there, flying away. And he's got the bow. it was largely the DC Comics visual adaptation of Tarzan done by Joe Kubert that removed the bow from the Tarzan visual iconography. It was ubiquitous before then, and it's nowhere to be found afterwards. There's no bow, except when Tarzan is actively firing a bow on the covers of the later Ballantine covers. He doesn't have one at all. And in a lot of these covers, he's wearing just as a matter of course. I must have had a little mass market copy of that and just got rid of it somewhere along the line. This next one is James Ellroy. I've mentioned before, James Ellroy is an acquired taste. I myself think he is a great American author of fiction. But he doesn't write normal books. They don't read normal. The closest thing he ever came was The Black Dahlia. And this book is far, far from normal. This is the cold 6,000. And on one level, it's about three very different men in three very different capacities who make the trip to Texas to clean up the loose ends of the JFK assassination. On one very surface level, that's what it's about. Really, I know that James Ellroy probably, in his anachronistic 60s speech, he would probably tell me that I'm wrong, but he's only one person. Once the book is out in the world, I have the right to judge it same as he does, and I think this book is about violence. I think that's especially true in the case of one of the characters, who is the biggest dispenser of violence throughout the book. And at the very end of the book, when violence comes home to him, he wets his pants and cries for his mother, quite literally. He holds up no better in the face of indifferent violence being done on him than any of his victims did in the course of the books, even though he was mocking them throughout the book for how little they hold up. When it comes his time, he holds up no better. And it is absorbingly brilliant writing, but it's not normal. It's very staccato. I at one time thought that the title, in addition to money and everything else, that the title of this book also referred to just cold 6,000 sentences. That the sentences in the book are just bullets, and they aren't connected to each other. They just each have a job to do. It takes a bit of getting used to. I would say, if you like reading fiction and you're into, and you want to you're okay with something that takes a little bit of getting used to, give James Ellroy a try. Okay, this next one is very different. This is normal stuff. The cover here is a little blurred. This is by Frank Schatzing. I think this is a translation into English. Pretty sure this came out in German first. This is The Swarm. That's what those letters say, if you could make them out. And this is a big book. It's like 800 pages long. And it is a novel that asks a simple question. What would happen if the oceans turned on humanity? What would happen if the water in the world started attacking human beings? And despite such a daft premise, it works. The whole book works. It's really interesting to read. Okay, then we have yet another animal book. This was done by... this is a collection of gleanings of articles from the American Scientist magazine. This is Exploring Animal Behavior, edited here by Paul Sherman and John Alcock. And I had this once upon a time. I'm sure there were things in it that I liked. The problem with books like this is that the articles are incredibly uneven in style and in tone and in competence and in readability, so you're never going to want to keep an anthology like this. You might be interested in some of the things that it has to say, but not everything. It's not evolved. I understand completely why I would have gotten that, scanned it, read it, and then got rid of it. This next one is by Lucas John Mix, and it is Life in Space. And that's just what it is. As it says, astrobiology for everyone. How it works. We don't know. There are no other examples of life in space other than this planet. Not even a microbe. Nothing. So we don't know. We have to guess. We have to guess how life works in combination with soil and hydrogen and all the other forces in the galaxy. This does as good a job as any other. I remember liking it. I don't think I would grab it again. I wasn't wowed. You know already just by looking at my face when I'm wowed by something, and it didn't wow me. Okay, well, this next one, not something you're going to expect to see on this channel. It's a horror novel, but not really. It's by Dean Koontz, and it's the book of his I like the most. It's Lightning. I got this as a mass market paperback, where there is a kind of horror foreboding around lightning strikes. But any of you who've read the book know that the further along the plot goes, the less horror and the more science fiction is involved. I thought it was fairly well done. I remember reading it and liking it. I remember thinking I liked it a whole lot more than anything else I've ever read from this author, and kind of wishing that this author would have done maybe more of this kind of thing. I would call this science fiction. I don't think there's much horror involved in it at all. And I think Dean Koontz had a knack for it. I would have liked to see more. This next one is by Wilson Follett. I've read this thing many, many times. Don't have a copy at the moment. This is Modern American Usage. And it is a prescriptive grammar guide, grammar and usage. And that's the reason I got rid of it, because I end up having very little patience with prescriptive grammar guides. I tend not to like them. They tend to be just the author throat clearing for the whole course of the book about kids these days. The introductory essay to this thing, I don't know who it's by. Does it say? It's edited and completed by Jacques Barzoun. I don't think Barzoun wrote the introduction. I think it was Wilson Follett who wrote the introduction. The introductory essay here is one of the most eloquent and spirited defenses of systematized grammar that I've ever read. It's wonderful. It really is wonderful. But the rest of it is all sorts of... It's a dictionary. It's not a narrative. So it's all sorts of picky things that you either can or cannot correct in your own English. Some of them have stuck with me over the years. A lot of them are very acidly written, very enjoyable to read. I might grab this again if I saw it in hardcover. There was also an orange, white, and blue mass market paperback. I would definitely grab that. Okay, then we have One World Classics. We've seen a lot of these. I was on One World Classics the mailing list for a while and got everything that they did. And this is the Canterbury Tales. This is translated and adapted by Christopher Lauer. That's what it looked like. I think I got rid of this right away. Adapting Chaucer, translating Chaucer, doing anything Chaucer other than just presenting Chaucer is dicey. Chaucer knew exactly what he was doing. He was writing for a demanding and extremely intelligent audience, and he knew exactly what he was doing. So adapting him for modern idiom or whatever, translating him even, I lose patience with it with every passing year. I probably read this and that was it. That was all I needed, was just to see what the author was doing. Okay, then we have another animal book. This is by Jonathan Balcom, and this is Second Nature, The Inner Lives of Animals. And as we've seen many times, I've read so many of this kind of books, so many of them, looking for a glimmer of what I want to see. And I'm happy to report that there are more and more glimmers every year. The idea being, I mean, these things broke ground when they started appearing, because the whole idea in science, and even popular science, was that animals don't have inner lives at all. And then gradually people were willing to give those inner lives to really charismatic megafauna, dolphins, for instance, or African elephants. And the whole time that was happening, the whole time that books like this were grudgingly admitting that, okay, maybe ravens have a version of intelligence, I was saying, no, that's not how it works. You have superb intelligence. You are a human being. But everything else has intelligence too. I know this because I've lived in their worlds. I've talked to them in their own languages. I know that everything else has everything. The only thing wrong with these kinds of books has been their tendency to judge animals' emotional complexity, or, God forbid, intellectual capacity, on strictly human terms, which is as dumb as judging you on strictly octopus terms. You would fail badly. And what would you say to that court? I swear I'm really intelligent, you're just using the wrong measure? Well, yeah, you'd say that and you'd be right. But anyway, I don't have this anymore. It can't have been all that memorable. We are wrapping up. Trust me, we're not going to go on forever. This next one is edited by Keith DeCandido. I think it's a collection of stories. It's Tales of the Dominion War from Star Trek. And I had a trade paperback of this once upon a time, and it was one of those books where you're reading it wanting it to be better than it is, because this is a great story, one of the greatest Star Trek stories of them all, and it deserves an epic novel. It really could support one. And this is not that novel. This is just a bunch of stories set in and around the televised episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine about the Dominion War, about an alien empire, an alien ruling entity from another part of the galaxy that comes to the Alpha Quadrant, intent to conquer it all. All of it. And once all the races in the Alpha Quadrant realize that, they band together. This is the epic Star Trek storyline in which the Klingons, the Romulans, and the humans all fight side by side. And it deserves a better book than this. I think it's history now. I mean, the Dominion War, Star Trek Deep Space Nine is 25 years old. So I don't know that anybody's ever going to write that novel. And I don't know who would buy it if they did. But I would like to see it. I've often been tempted to write it myself. Okay, and then we'll finish up on a contentious note, but I'll try to be civil. This is Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Christ, a journalist's personal investigation of the evidence for Jesus Christ. And I often say when it comes to Christian apologetics like this that they lie on every page. This book lies on the cover by referring to Lee Strobel as a journalist. Lee Strobel was a bathed in the blood of the Lamb, completely evangelical, born-again Christian when he started researching this book. He was not in any way a journalist. He says this. He loves to say this in his personal appearances. I was once an atheist. I was a journalist. I only went by the facts. I wasn't going to be convinced of anything until there were facts. That is simply a lie. I hate to say it, but that is simply a lie. And that is the underpinning of this book. The gimmick here is I had no dog in the race. I was just looking to see if there was any evidence, not only that Jesus Christ existed, but that he was the Messiah. Sorry, I break out laughing because that's such a thing. Obviously, there is no proof for that. There would be no other religions. None of this relies on proof. If your faith relies on evidence, it's not faith anymore. And that would be bad enough if the author didn't understand that, but unfortunately, the author understands that quite well. This is a very smooth book. You have to have your grappons on to fully grasp how deceptive this book is, how deeply deceptive it is. All I can say is if you are a believing Christian and you want to read this book because you want some sort of factual basis for your faith, I'd say two things. Number one is maybe you should re-examine your faith if you think it needs a factual basis. And two, even if that is where you are, don't trust this book. There are plenty of other things to read. Simply email me and I will give you better places to start than this. If your case for Christ relies on lies, that's really bad. That's obviously, you're poisoned from the start there. If you were going to make a case for Christ, the very first thing you would have to do historically is prove that he existed, that there ever was such a person. You would have to prove that. And the standard way to do that would be a multiplicity of sources. And by multiplicity, I don't just mean many people. I mean different kinds of sources. There is no source for the existence of Jesus Christ as a person on earth that is not also a religious doctrine at the basis of the church built around him being a divine being. That is not a historical source. And it doesn't matter how many of them there are. You need something else. And there isn't anything else. That is the simple fact that you will not encounter in this book. There isn't anything else. Pliny the Younger, Josephus, Tacitus, they make allusions or explicit mentions of a group called the Christians. That's it. That's all. Thousands of people being healed in the Judean countryside. A huge amount of uproar in Jerusalem itself. In a part of the world that was largely illiterate, but they had all sorts of visitors who were literate and prolific. And they don't mention it. There's no mention anywhere. And believe you me, the Christian church has looked high and low for such things. They've even had to resort to faking some of them. There is no evidence there at all. And there's plenty. Well, anyway, you don't need to rehearse the course of the book. All I'm saying is this is a mega popular book. It allowed Lee Strobel to have 3 houses, all with heated pools. It allows him to have as many private planes as he wants, just as Jesus intended. But it is not the book to read on the subject. If you want to read about early Christianity, I can gladly make you recommendations, but not this one, no matter how many used bookstores you see it in. And that's going to wrap it up. That is the Library of the Lost for today. To keep you in books until the next time I get around to a library tour. It might not be this weekend. It might have to be next week sometime. But anyway, this has gone on quite long enough, longer than I expected. I'm going to wrap this up, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.